Today we're going to be talking about naming covalent molecules. So remember, if we have a covalent bond, what that means is that the valence electrons are actually being shared. So a covalent bond means that we have shared electrons. When it comes to talking about a covalent bond, in this video, we're only going to name simple binary molecules. So these are going to be molecules that exist only of a bond between a nonmetal and a metalloid, or two nonmetals. Remember, if we are trying to use the periodic table to determine whether something is a metal or a nonmetal, the nonmetals will be on the right side of the periodic table. That means if we see anything on the left side of the periodic table, it's a metal and is therefore ionic. The dividing force between whether something is a nonmetal or a nonmetal is our special group called the metalloids that form a stair step in the periodic table. I would encourage you to memorize those metalloid elements so that you can use that information to use the periodic table to determine if it's on the left, it's a metal, and if it's on the right, it would be a nonmetal. Now we're going to talk about our rules for actually naming a covalent molecule. In a covalent molecule, you will always include a number prefix with each element except if there is only one of the first element. So our number prefixes are over here on the side. So for example, we have 1 is mono, 2 is di, 3 is tri, and so on the whole list. The first element is going to keep its name. So if it was sulfur, it will keep the name sulfur. You will just make sure that you include a number prefix with it, except if there's only one of that atom in our molecule, then you will not include a prefix. The second element in our binary molecule is going to only keep the root of its name and is then given the ending IDE. So you might see something like tetrafluoride, trichloride. It will always have the ending IDE. Our last rule: if there is a repeating vowel sound between the prefix and the element, you'll remove the first of the vowels. So what that means is you're going to take the last vowel on the prefix and you're going to get rid of it. So if you have something like tetraoxide, you'll get rid of the A and you would only have tetroxide. Now let's look at some examples. In our first example, we're going to try and write the formula for carbon monoxide. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to go to my periodic table and I am going to grab my chemical symbol of carbon, which is a capital C. I look for my prefix. I don't see one, and since it's the first element, I know that there can only be one carbon atom in this compound. So I'm done with the first part of my element. My next part is monoxide. So I'm going to look at the root, which is OX, so that's going to come from the word oxygen. So I will go and I will grab the chemical symbol for oxygen, which is a capital O. Now I have the prefix mono, so I'm going to check my prefix list. Mono means one, so that means that there is only one carbon atom. So remember, if it's just one, you don't have to write any subscripts. So to correctly go from the word carbon monoxide to the formula, it would just be written as CO. So let's look at our next example that does have number prefixes that we'll need to write as subscripts. My first element is nitrogen. So I will go to the periodic table and get the chemical symbol for nitrogen, which is N. Now I'll look at the prefix. My prefix is di, so I go to my prefix list and I get the number 2. When we are describing how many atoms are in a molecule, we use a subscript number to represent that. So remember, my subscripts go down low and to the right of the atom it describes. So that takes care of our first element. Our second element, it says we have tetrachloride. So I'm going to go to the root of that word, chlor, look at my periodic table, and I see we have an element chlorine with the symbol Cl. So we take its chemical symbol and we write it in. Now we look at the prefix. My prefix is tetra. I go to my list, I see that means 4. So again, to describe that there are 4 chlorine atoms in this molecule, I will use a subscript 4 down and to the right to describe that. So you have seen now examples of going from words to formulas. Now let's look at going from formulas to words, going to the names. In these examples, we start with the formula, and I want to write the chemical name. So to go backwards in a covalent molecule, you will follow the same process as before, except you will be adding the prefixes. So if we look at our first example, we have S. There's no subscript after it, so I know that there is only one of this atom in the molecule. Remember my exception, if I only have one of my first element, I exclude the prefix. So the first part of my binary molecule name will just be sulfur. You don't have to capitalize these, it's just a habit, but you do not and you should not capitalize these unless they're at the beginning of a sentence. My second element is O, so I look at the periodic table and I see that that's the chemical symbol for oxygen. So remember, we only keep the root of that word. So we're only going to keep, usually it's just that first syllable. So we're only going to keep the ox, the root of that word. If I look at my subscript, I see that I have 3 atoms of oxygen in this covalent molecule. So I go to my prefix list and I see that the prefix that matches with 3 is tri. So prefixes always go in the front, I have tri-ox, and the ending is the only thing that I have left. Remember, my second element will always get the ending IDE. So SO3 is going to be written in words, and its name would be sulfur trioxide. Let's look at our second example. In this example, we see that we have the chemical symbol P. I look at the periodic table, and that is the symbol for phosphorus. Now, though, if I look to the right of my phosphorus symbol, I see a subscript number, and I see a 2. Since I see a 2, I need to include a prefix with this first element. Remember, the only time we will not include a prefix is if it's on the first element and there's only 1. So since I do have this 2, I see it matches up to di, so I will include the prefix di. So the first part of my name is diphosphorus. I look at the second part, I see the chemical symbol F. I know that there is an element on the periodic table, fluorine. So I'm going to keep the root of fluorine. So if I keep the root of something, that means I get rid of its initial endings. I see the number 5. So I go to my prefix list. The number 5 relates to the prefix penta. So I will put penta in front, and I will always add the ending IDE. So the name of this molecule is diphosphorus pentafluoride. We'll always follow these naming rules if you have been going over the naming of binary molecules, which remember are a covalent bond. And the only other thing that might come up, and in my class, I won't have you do this, but in the case of covalent molecules, deciding whether I'm going to put sulfur or oxygen, for example, as my first element, I'll look at the electronegativity values. Whichever element is the least electronegative will come first. So that might be a good multiple choice or written question on a test, is to describe in the event of a covalent molecule and deciding which element to put first, you will look at the least electronegative element and put them first. I hope this was helpful.